Hi, today we're working on Blue Star and we've got our blocks finished and we are working on hooking them together. So join us as we take one block, turn it into two, and then create a lovely quilt top. It'll be easy and you'll see just how after this. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi, and welcome back. Today we're working on putting our blocks together to create our quilt top. We've worked on this taking two colors of fabric, cutting them into strips or blocks, cutting those down and sewing them back together to create this lovely design, Sister's Choice, and then also this design that I call the plain block. But today we're talking about joining the two together. And they're going to be put together in a checkerboard pattern so that the plain block is alternated with the busy block, Sister's Choice. And this is going to be very similar to what you did when we assembled the Sister's Choice block. We're going to take right sides together and pin that plain block to the Sister's Choice block. Now, when I did it, I made a conscious choice to make sure that all of my first stitches were sewn parallel to the seam lines on the plain block. And the reason that I wanted to do that was so that if you were looking at seams on this quilt top, and you're not going to be able to tell it too much after it's all put together and quilted, but at least at this phase of the project, you're going to be able to tell that there was some consistency in it. And you're not having one this way and one this way and willy-nilly through the whole thing. That was just my personal choice. And you can do however you want to. Saying that though, if you do that, you need to make sure that you assemble these in no larger than pairs to begin with, and leave at least one or two pairs unsewn until you get all 5 of the strips complete. Because if you hook them all together in pairs and only leave one orphan, so to speak, out there, you're going to find that on your bottom row, you're probably going to have to move that seam perpendicular instead of parallel. So that would be my tip for that. And then we just pin these together the way we did when we were assembling the busy block. So on these, I've made sure that the edges of the fabric on both pieces match very nicely. If there was a little bit of discrepancy, I would ease it together. And if it was a lot of discrepancy, then I would go back and look at those corner blocks and see if they were square. And you have to be careful that if the corner block is square, but maybe the square next to it had stretched out, that you correct that. So then I pinned them together, paying special attention to where the seams were pressed one way or the other, so when I sew, I'm not forcing them into an odd direction. And we're just going to get started. I don't think that we need a close-up of this. What I will do is I'll bring it up here so you can see how those are pinned together. Not a lot of pins. I think I used 6 or 7 in these. And then I'm going to run those through the machine. I've already stuck myself one time with these pins today, so I want to be kind of careful. And my foot is getting away from me. If you're not going to be able to finish assembling these, I would say within a couple of days or a week, I would backstitch the corners just so if they're handled a lot, they don't come unsewn. But if you're going to move through them pretty quickly like I am, I wouldn't worry about that too much. And again, my machine is set on 1/4 of an inch seam, and it is at 2.6. And when I come up to those pins, I want to be sure to take it out before it gets to the seam guide. I'm using that 1/4 inch foot that gives me that guide so that the fabric doesn't deviate. It stays right on that 1/4 inch, and that means our seam is very consistent. Okay, there it is. The seam has come out nicely. I have noticed that my machine is skipping occasionally a stitch, and I rethreaded it. I don't know whether there's maybe some fuzz in there I need to clean out or what, but we've got just a few seams here this morning, and then I'll probably tackle that again. So we've got 2 hooked together, and this is what they're going to look like. Now, in keeping with the way we've done everything else, I will press this seam to the busy block so that in the areas where there is a darker fabric, especially right there, that seam will fall under that blue and you won't see it. And then the other areas where there's just white coming over, it won't be as noticeable. My goal was to keep all the seams underneath the busy blocks, but I discovered, because I've sewn a few of these ahead so that you're able to see a finished product instead of watching me sew 25 blocks together, is that when I sewed the long seams for the strips that we're going to put together, that I was not always able to do that. So you may want to consider opening these seams. That would just be a matter of personal preference. So just an option there for you. Okay, so we've got 25 blocks. We're going to put them together in pairs, and I'm going to do most of them. I probably, like I said, would leave 4 or 5 unpaired and get the strips together. 2 of these pairs plus 1 will be a strip, and it's just going to matter whether it's going to be a busy block on top, and then the next one would be a plain block on top. What I'm going to do is I've got this other strip. This is the other half of the single strip. This is going to be an end strip. So we've got a busy block, a plain block, and a busy block. And then we're going to hook these 2 to it to give us a full strip. But I've got 1 seam here and 1 seam here. So I'm going to quickly put those together, and then I'm going to show you 1 strip. And while I go and press these, I'm going to hang up the rest of the quilt. I've got 3 strips complete, and I want you to see what our final product is going to look like. Once we get this together, then I'm going to show you how I pin strip to strip, and then you will know everything you need to know to get this quilt top together. So I'm going to just sew now for a moment, and I'll probably speed this film up so it doesn't take quite as long. So there you can see all 5 blocks hooked together. And this will be one of the outside strips for the quilt. And it really comes together pretty quickly. I want to mention a couple of other things. First of all, I've noticed that when I'm sewing the blocks together and also when I'm sewing the strips together, that some of the junctions where we have so much fabric, my machine wants to struggle just a little bit. And I think it's because it needs a little bit more pressure on the presser foot to help it move that bulk of fabric through. So keep an eye on that. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was points. Now you can see on this seam that we've done pretty well with making sure that we keep our points. And that meaning that we've sewn in the seam allowance of the busy block and we've not sewn too far over, so we do get the points. For the most part, I will tell you that I am super happy with this 1/4 inch foot on my machine because it has kept those seams consistent and I've had very few issues with losing the point. Sometimes it comes close or it's right up at that seam, but for the most part you can see that we've got that point in there. There were a couple that I had to go back and adjust just a little bit. Either that half square triangle had shifted just a little bit, or my seam had gotten just a little too wide, and it was fairly easy when they're still in the blocks or they're just in pairs to be able to do that. And I also, when I was sewing on it last night, had a couple of instances, like I talked about my machine skipping, and in places where it was more than one stitch, I went back and sewed over that just to make sure that in the future that doesn't come loose and cause a gap in the seam. So that's it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here for a moment. I am going to pin this strip to another strip so I can show you how that does and how it lines up. And I'm also going to hang the quilt top up so you can see, at least I would say halfway through, what that quilt top is going to look like. Well, there it is. I've got this piece that we just put together, pressed, and I've hung up the first 3 rows of our Blue Star quilt. And I think it's just stunning, actually. It's very vibrant, it's very bright. You're seeing just the middle of it here. There are 5 blocks up and down, and right now we have 3. We've got the other 2 here. So this is going to be a really large block. Let me see if I can make this video come out so you can see it a little bit better. Well, there's a little bit, and you can see there's a block down here as well. So that's what it's going to look like. It'll give you a really good idea. I personally am very pleased with it. The design came out better than I hoped. When I first changed this middle block to just the single dot and put it together, I was a little concerned because it was a lot of blue and then the stark white with the blue. But seeing it come together when you put multiples together instead of just the 1 and 1, you can really see that this block gives your eye a bit of a rest, where this, you're looking at all the points and the way it comes together, and so that's a welcome change. So let's get going on this last strip so we can hook it to this and be done with this, and then we'll look forward to borders. So what we're going to do here, we've got 2 of these strips, and one of them starts with the busy block and one of them starts with the plain block. So we're going to alternate, just like we did when we hooked the 2 together. We're hooking them together the same way in the strips. So I'm going to start at the end here, and I'm going to work on this 1 block at a time. And by that I mean pinning. When I get ready to sew, I'm going to sew the whole strip. Now, let's just talk a minute about alternatives and different ways of doing things, because there's nothing that says you have to sew it together in strips. That was just kind of the theme of this whole quilt, about how to get something together in a hurry by sewing strips instead of single pieces. So you certainly have the prerogative to sew this together in squares, or in maybe you want to do horizontal strips instead of vertical. For this particular project, I don't think that's going to make much of a difference because it's 5 squares by 5 squares. So whether you sew it one way or the other really doesn't matter. Okay, we've got the ends of the top piece done, and then we're going to start in the middle. Now this way we're sewing it, we do have the seam on the plain block for the center. So you've got 2 seams in the middle of this section that you will want to match fairly closely. I mean, if you're looking for consistency and consistency in your design, and you want to have a lot of continuity, that's the word I'm looking for, in your sewing and your placement of your items, then you're going to want to do that. So I just really quickly just hook it up there in the middle at the ends, and then stick a pin in the other 2 seams. And those 2 that I'm matching, you can see I'm putting 2 pins here, and then just 1 here, and then 1 on the ends. Now this seam here, where we transition from the busy block into the plain block, I'm also putting 2, because we're going to have on the top, the top here where the plain block is, we only have to pull that seam over one way. But on the other side, that's the busy block. So you're almost going to have to flip this over to you and make sure that when you're pinning so that you can get those seams in the busy block going in the right direction. And because we're putting the pins with the head on the outside away from our needle, that should not be an issue. So we're just going to do the same thing here on this one. We're going to pin the center block, matching up those seams. And not to worry, I realize my last video was very long, so I'm trying to be very conscientious on this one that we move through this pretty swiftly. Now that seam needs to be open. I'm going to flip that open. And we need a pin there for that one. And I think that's going to do it. A rogue pin there. Oops, I do have one more seam. Okay, so we have pinned the first 2 blocks on this strip. We have 3 more to go, and then we can sew this. Instead of having you watch me do all this, I'm going to pin it, and then we're going to sew this strip together so you can see how one long strip goes together. I'm going to probably zoom this up so it doesn't take quite as long. So just sit tight for me just a minute and we'll get that done. Okay, so we have sewn this whole seam down. Let me check it real quick because I got almost to the end and my sewing machine was making a weird noise, and I threaded it back because the thread broke, and then I noticed that I had a spot along the seam about this far back that skipped enough stitches that it needed to be redone. So I just went back and I just actually sewed over the seam so that it will hold nicely. And I think I see one little area where I've got the seam going in the wrong direction. I may or may not choose to fix that, but nevertheless, that's how that long seam goes that sews those two strips together. And then that's how it looks. It's really quite simple. It's just repeating what we've done, sewing the small strips together to get the block, and then we sew the big strips together to get the quilt top. So I think you have some work to do if you're following along with me to assemble the quilt top. And now I'm going to take this and press it down, and then the next time I sit down to sew, I will hook this to this, and we'll have our quilt top finished. Again, I want to reiterate what I have found to be the most surprising, in a happy way, part of this quilt, and that is this foot. And I'm going to take a picture of it and show it so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about, because I'm not sure the video comes in close enough that you can see the detail on this and how it works. But the combination of this foot and being able to set your sewing machine so that you get an accurate, and I do mean accurate, 1/4 inch seam has really been a game changer. I know that in other quilts that I've done that have had points, I've had problems with losing the points. I've had problems with the stitch getting so close to the edge of the fabric that I would have to go back and pick it out and sew it back on. But with this one, it really is night and day difference in how the blocks and the strips went together. And it's relaxing. It makes a task that you might find daunting or aggravating relaxing. And you'll see we've got some puckers here, and that's perfectly normal. I think that's just a function of the seam needs to be pressed, because in the areas where we've got the seam pressed, we don't see that. But it's all together. The points are looking nice. The design's looking nice. As far as I can tell, all of my seams, like I was talking about with this plain block, are in the right direction. So we're in great shape, and we've really made a lot of progress. That's one of the things I really like about strip piecing by machine, is that it comes together very quickly. So if you have a need to put a quilt together quickly, or maybe you just are anxious and excited to see that progress really quick, then that would probably be the area that you enjoy most, is something that you're machine piecing versus a hand pieced or hand quilted project. Now, like I said, once I get this hooked to this one, I'm going to put the borders on, and I will be showing that in a video. And then I also will be talking a little bit about what my plans are to quilt this, because initially my thought was I was going to send it out and let someone quilt it, and I may still do that, or I may try to just quilt it on my machine. I don't have a quilting machine, so it would be on this domestic machine. It doesn't have a huge throat width to be able to do that. I'm not sure how that would go, but it might be worth taking a shot at it. That's to be seen. It is a big quilt. It's going to be probably 70 by 70, I think is what I calculated. So it's going to be a really big quilt. But unless I can find someone who can machine quilt it for me in a 2-week period so that we can wrap this up and show you what this project is, I'm not sure I want to send it out. So we'll see what I can find. And some of the folks that I've looked at have a much longer lead time, so I'm not sure that's going to work, but we'll see. Maybe I'll come across someone. So there we are. I hope you've enjoyed so far our project Blue Star and the progress that we've made on it. I hope that some of these tips that I've given you and the way I've chosen to assemble it is helpful, and there's at least something in there that you can take away for your own projects. And if you've liked this video, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to us and hit that notification so that you get notified when we drop new videos. Right now, I am still doing 1 video a week on this project until we wrap it up. So I hope to see you next time here at the Shamrock Quilt Studio, and have a great week.